Rachel Morgan woke up that Monday morning with no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had been a judge for 5 years now, and every morning felt the same. Wake up at 6, drink coffee, get dressed, and head to the courthouse. It was a routine she knew by heart, but this morning was different from the start. Rachel stood in front of her closet and frowned. Her favorite black suit had a stain on the jacket. She must have missed it when she wore it last week. She tried to clean it with water, but that only made it worse. Now she was running late. She grabbed another suit from the closet, a dark blue one that she didn't wear as often. It was professional and neat, but it wasn't her usual choice. Rachel looked at herself in the mirror and adjusted her collar. At 42 years old, she had worked hard to get where she was. Being a black woman judge wasn't easy. She had faced doubt and discrimination throughout her career. But she had proven herself over and over again. Rachel grabbed her briefcase and headed out the door. Her husband had already left for work, and her teenage son was still asleep. She would see them tonight at dinner. For now, she had a full day of cases waiting for her at the courthouse. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. Rachel listened to the news on the radio and thought about the cases she would hear today. There was a robbery case, a dispute between two businesses, and several smaller matters. She had read all the files over the weekend and felt prepared. When she arrived at the courthouse, Rachel noticed something different right away. Her usual parking spot in the private lot for judges was blocked by a construction truck. Workers were fixing something on the building, and yellow caution tape covered the area. A security guard she didn't recognize waved her away from the entrance. Rachel sighed. She would have to park in the public lot and enter through the main entrance. It wasn't a big deal, but it meant she would be even more late than she already was. She found a spot in the crowded public parking area and walked toward the courthouse. The morning air was cool and fresh. Other people walked toward the building too. Some were lawyers in suits carrying briefcases like hers. Others looked nervous and uncomfortable. They were probably people coming to court for their own cases. Rachel had seen thousands of faces like theirs over the years. She walked up the wide stone steps that led to the main entrance. The courthouse was an old building, built almost 100 years ago. It had tall columns and large wooden doors. Rachel usually entered through a side door that led directly to the judge's chambers, but today she had no choice but to use the public entrance. Inside the building, the lobby was busy. People stood in line at the metal detectors. Security officers checked bags and made sure everyone followed the rules. The noise of conversations echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings. Rachel joined the line. She noticed a few lawyers she knew, and they nodded at her with respect. But most people in the lobby were strangers. They didn't know who she was without her black judge's robe. That's when she noticed the officer at the security checkpoint. He was a white man in his 40s with short brown hair and a thick mustache. His uniform was crisp and clean, and he wore his badge proudly on his chest. His name tag read, Matthews. Officer Derek Matthews stood with his arms crossed, watching everyone who came through. His eyes moved from person to person, judging them before they even reached him. Rachel could see the way he looked at people. His face was hard and unfriendly. When a young black man went through the metal detector, Matthews watched him extra carefully, even though the detector didn't beep. Rachel felt a small knot form in her stomach. She had dealt with men like Matthews before. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was a look she had seen too many times in her life. She went through the metal detector without any problems. Her briefcase went through the X-ray machine, and she waited on the other side to pick it up. Everything was normal. She was just another person entering the courthouse, at least that's what it looked like. Rachel grabbed her briefcase and started walking toward the hallway that led to the judge's chambers. She knew this building like the back of her hand. She had walked these halls for 5 years. Every door, every turn, every staircase was familiar to her. But Officer Matthews was watching her. She could feel his eyes on her back as she walked away from the security checkpoint. She didn't think much of it at first. She was in a hurry, and she needed to get to her office to put on her robe before court started. The hallway stretched out in front of her. A few other people walked in the same direction, probably heading to different courtrooms. Rachel walked with confidence. This was her workplace. This was where she belonged. She approached the door that led to the restricted area where the judges' chambers were located. This door was usually locked, and only judges and their staff could enter. Rachel reached into her briefcase to find her key card. That's when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. They were moving fast, getting closer. Rachel turned around and saw Officer Matthews walking straight toward her. His face was red and his eyes were angry. "Excuse me," he said loudly. His voice echoed in the hallway. "Where do you think you're going?" Rachel was surprised by his tone. She stopped and looked at him calmly. "I'm going to my office," she said simply. Matthews walked closer until he was standing right in front of her. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and he used his height to try to intimidate her. "This area is restricted," he said. "You can't go back there." Rachel took a deep breath. She had been in difficult situations before, and she knew how to stay calm. "I understand," she said politely. "I work here. I'm a judge." The words should have been enough. They should have ended the conversation right there. But Matthews didn't believe her. She could see it in his face. His eyes looked at her from head to toe, taking in her appearance. A black woman in her 40s carrying a briefcase claiming to be a judge. "You're a judge?" he said, and his voice was full of doubt. He almost laughed. "You don't look like a judge to me." Rachel felt anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had trained herself over the years to control her emotions, especially in moments like this. "I am Judge Rachel Morgan," she said clearly. "I've been serving at this courthouse for 5 years. Matthews crossed his arms again. "I've never seen you before," he said, "and I know all the judges here." "I usually come in through the south entrance," Rachel explained. She kept her voice calm and professional, even though she wanted to yell at this man. "My parking area is blocked today because of construction. That's why I'm entering this way." But Matthews wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind about who she was and what she was doing. In his eyes, she didn't fit his idea of what a judge should look like. To him, she was just another black woman trying to go somewhere she didn't belong. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Matthews said. His hand moved to his belt, close to his handcuffs. Rachel's heart started beating faster. This was getting serious. She slowly reached into her briefcase and pulled out her judicial identification card. It had her photo, her name, and her title clearly printed on it. She held it out to Matthews. But before he could even look at it properly, something in his attitude changed. Maybe it was the way she moved, or maybe it was just his own prejudice taking over. Whatever it was, Matthews decided that Rachel was being difficult. In his mind, she was challenging his authority. "You need to come with me," he said, reaching for her arm. Rachel pulled her arm away from Officer Matthews. She was not going to let him touch her. "I showed you my identification," she said firmly. "I am Judge Rachel Morgan, and I need to get to my courtroom." Matthew's face turned even redder. He didn't like being told what to do, especially not by a black woman. "You're being disrespectful to a law enforcement officer," he said loudly. "I asked you to come with me and you need to comply." Other people in the hallway had stopped walking. They were watching now. A young lawyer stood frozen near the water fountain. An older woman who worked in the clerk's office had her hand over her mouth. Everyone could see what was happening, but no one seemed to know what to do. Rachel looked around at the faces watching her. She felt embarrassed and angry at the same time. This was her courthouse. These were her colleagues and the people who came here for justice. And now she was being treated like a criminal in front of them all. "Officer Matthews," she said, reading his name tag clearly. "I have shown you my identification. I have explained who I am. I don't understand why you're continuing this confrontation." "The ID could be fake," Matthews said. He still hadn't really looked at it. He had barely glanced at the card she held out. "And your attitude is making me suspicious. If you were really a judge, you would show more respect to security." Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always been respectful. She had been calm and polite even when he questioned her. But in Matthew's mind, her confidence looked like attitude. Her self-assurance looked like defiance. "I am showing respect," Rachel said. "But I also expect to be treated with respect. Now, if you would please look at my identification properly, you'll see that everything I'm saying is true." Matthews finally took the ID card from her hand. He held it and looked at it, but his face showed that he still didn't believe it was real. "Anyone can make a fake ID," he muttered. He turned the card over, looking at the back, then the front again. Rachel's patience was running out. She had a courtroom full of people waiting for her. She had cases to hear, decisions to make. She didn't have time for this foolishness. "You can call the court administrator if you don't believe me," she suggested. "Or you can speak to any of the other judges. They will all confirm who I am." But Matthews wasn't interested in making phone calls or checking with anyone else. He had decided that Rachel was trying to fool him, and nothing was going to change his mind. In his 15 years as a police officer, he had developed a way of seeing the world. And in his world, black people were usually the ones causing problems, not the ones in charge. "You know what?" Matthews said, holding onto her ID card. "I think you need to come with me to security office. We can sort this out there." "I'm not going anywhere," Rachel said. Her voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "I am a judge at this courthouse, and I will not be detained by security for trying to enter my own office." That's when Matthews made his decision. He had asked her nicely, he told himself. He had given her a chance to cooperate. Now she was refusing his lawful orders. In his mind, that gave him the right to use force. "Ma'am, you are under detention," Matthews said. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt. "Put your hands behind your back." Rachel's eyes went wide. She couldn't believe this was really happening. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am a judge. You are making a huge mistake. Hands behind your back now," Matthews ordered. His voice was hard and cold. Rachel looked around again. More people had gathered now. She saw familiar faces, people she had known for years, but they all looked shocked and scared. No one was stepping in to help her. Maybe they were afraid of Matthews. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Or maybe they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. She thought about fighting back, about refusing to comply. But Rachel knew how these situations could turn out. She had seen too many cases in her courtroom where things escalated and ended badly. She knew that resisting could give Matthews an excuse to use even more force. She was a black woman and he was a white police officer. She knew exactly how that story usually ended. So Rachel made a choice. She slowly turned around and put her hands behind her back. Her briefcase fell to the floor with a loud thud. Papers spilled out onto the marble floor. Her ID card was still in Matthews's hand. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "You are making a terrible mistake." Matthews didn't answer. He grabbed her wrists roughly and pulled them together. The metal handcuffs were cold against her skin. She heard the clicking sound as he locked them tight. Too tight. The metal bit into her wrists and she winced in pain. "You're hurting me," she said. "The handcuffs are too tight." "They're fine," Matthews said. He didn't loosen them. He grabbed her upper arm and started pulling her back down the hallway, away from the judge's chambers. Rachel had never felt so humiliated in her entire life. She was being paraded through the courthouse in handcuffs. People she worked with every day were watching her being treated like a criminal. Some of them had their phones out, probably recording video. This would be all over the internet by the end of the day. As Matthews dragged her through the hallway, Rachel tried to keep her head up. She would not cry. She would not break down. She had spent her whole life dealing with people who underestimated her, who judged her by the color of her skin instead of her character and abilities. This was just another example of that injustice. They passed by a young black man who was waiting outside a courtroom. He looked at Rachel with wide eyes and she could see the fear in his face. If this could happen to her, a judge, what chance did he have? The thought made Rachel even more angry. Matthews pulled her into the courthouse lobby. Even more people could see her now. The line at the security checkpoint had grown longer and everyone turned to look. Some people gasped. Others whispered to each other. A few people took out their phones to record what was happening. "Keep moving," Matthews said, pulling her toward a door marked Security Office. Rachel's mind was racing. She was trying to figure out what to do next. Should she demand to speak to a supervisor? Should she tell Matthews that he was going to lose his job over this? Or should she just stay quiet and let this play out? She knew that anything she said could be twisted against her later. Just as they reached the security office door, Rachel heard a voice calling out behind them. Derek Matthews. Stop right now." Matthews turned around, still holding Rachel's arm. An older woman was rushing toward them. She was wearing the uniform of a senior court clerk and her face was full of shock and horror. "What are you doing?" the woman demanded. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she had worked at the courthouse for over 20 years. She knew every judge, every lawyer, and every staff member in the building. "I'm detaining this woman for attempting to access restricted areas," Matthews said. He sounded confident, like he had done the right thing. Margaret looked at Rachel and her face went pale. "Derek, do you know who this is?" she asked. Her voice was shaking. "She claims to be a judge, but I don't believe her," Matthews said. "She was acting suspicious and wouldn't cooperate." "You idiot," Margaret said. The words came out before she could stop them. "That is Judge Morgan. She's been working here for 5 years. What have you done?" Matthew's confident expression started to crack. He looked at Rachel again, really looked at her this time. Then he looked at Margaret, who was staring at him with disbelief and anger. "What?" he said quietly. "That is Judge Rachel Morgan," Margaret repeated slowly as if she was talking to a child. "She presides over courtroom 4. She has worked at this courthouse since 2020, and you just handcuffed her." Other security officers had come out of the office now. They stood behind Matthews, looking at the scene in front of them. One of them, an older black officer named James, closed his eyes and shook his head. He had known this would happen someday. Matthews had a reputation for being aggressive, especially with black people. Matthews' hand started shaking as he reached for the keys to the handcuffs. I didn't know," he stammered. "She didn't look like... she wasn't wearing her robe because judges don't put their robes on until they get to their chambers," Margaret said. Her voice was getting louder now. She was furious. "How could you not know who she is? Her picture is on the wall with all the other judges." More court staff had gathered around them now. Everyone was talking at once. Some people were angry at Matthews. Others were trying to comfort Rachel. A few people were already on their phones, probably calling supervisors and administrators. Matthews' hands were shaking so badly that he could barely get the key into the handcuff lock. Rachel stood still and silent, her back to him, waiting to be released. The handcuffs had left deep red marks on her wrists where they had been too tight. Finally, the handcuffs clicked open. Matthews pulled them away from Rachel's wrists and she brought her hands forward slowly. She rubbed her wrists where the metal had hurt her. The marks were clear and dark against her brown skin. She turned around and looked at Matthews. His face had gone from red to white. He looked like he might be sick. All the confidence and authority he had shown just minutes ago was completely gone. Rachel stood in the middle of the courthouse lobby, rubbing her sore wrists. Everyone was staring at her. She could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see what she would do next. The red marks on her wrists burned, but the humiliation she felt burned even more. Officer Matthews stood in front of her, still holding the handcuffs in his shaking hands. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no words came out. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. All around them, people whispered and pointed. Some were still recording videos on their phones. "Judge Morgan, I am so sorry," Matthews finally managed to say. His voice cracked. "I didn't realize... I thought you were..." Rachel held up her hand to stop him. She didn't want to hear his excuses. Not now, not in front of all these people. She needed to think. She needed to process what had just happened to her. But most of all, she needed to get away from this man. Margaret Chen, the senior court clerk, moved closer to Rachel. "Your Honor, are you okay?" she asked gently. "Should I call for medical attention?" Rachel shook her head. She wasn't physically injured, not really. The marks on her wrists would fade. But the wound to her dignity, to her sense of safety in her own workplace, that would take much longer to heal. "I just need to get to my chambers," Rachel said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "Of course," Margaret said. She bent down and picked up Rachel's briefcase from where it had fallen earlier. The papers that had spilled out were scattered across the marble floor, and several people rushed to help gather them. Margaret collected them all and put them back into the briefcase carefully. By now, more senior courthouse staff had arrived. The head of security, a man named Robert Torres, came running from his office. His face was red from rushing, and he looked at the scene in front of him with growing horror. James, the older black security officer, was already explaining what had happened. "Judge Morgan," Robert said, approaching carefully, "I cannot begin to apologize for what has occurred here. This is absolutely unacceptable." Rachel looked at him. Robert had always been professional and respectful. She had never had any problems with him. But right now she didn't want to talk to anyone in a security uniform. "I need to go to my chambers," she repeated. "Yes, of course," Robert said quickly. He turned to Matthews and his expression changed from apologetic to furious. "Officer Matthews, you are relieved of duty immediately. Go to my office and wait for me there. Do not speak to anyone. Do not leave the building. We will deal with this situation very soon." Matthews looked like he wanted to say something more to Rachel, maybe to apologize again or to explain himself, but Robert's angry stare stopped him. He hung his head and walked slowly toward the security office, still carrying the handcuffs that had been on Rachel's wrists just moments ago. "Can someone please escort Judge Morgan to her chambers?" Robert asked. "And clear a path. Everyone needs to step back and give her some space." Margaret took Rachel's arm gently. "Come on, Your Honor," she said softly. "Let's get you out of here." They walked through the lobby together. The crowd parted to let them pass. Rachel could hear people whispering, but she couldn't make out the words. She kept her eyes forward and her head up. She would not let them see her cry. She would not let them see how much this had hurt her. As they walked down the hallway toward the judges' chambers, they passed by courtrooms where other judges were already hearing cases. A few lawyers stood in the hallway waiting for their cases to be called. They all stared as Rachel and Margaret walked by. Some of them looked shocked. Others looked angry on Rachel's behalf. Judge Thomas Bradley stepped out of his courtroom. He was an older white man who had been a judge for almost 20 years. When he saw Rachel, he immediately knew something was wrong. "Rachel, what happened?" he asked with concern. "Not now, Tom," Margaret said before Rachel could answer. "We need to get her to her chambers." Judge Bradley nodded and stepped back, but Rachel could see the worry in his eyes. News traveled fast in the courthouse. By the time she reached her office, everyone would know what had happened. Finally, they reached the door to Rachel's chambers. Margaret unlocked it and held it open. Inside, Rachel's law clerk, a young woman named Sarah Kim, looked up from her desk with a smile. But the smile disappeared when she saw Rachel's face. "Judge Morgan? What's wrong?" Sarah asked, standing up quickly. Rachel walked into her office without answering. She could see her black robe hanging on the coat rack in the corner. She should be wearing that robe right now, sitting on the bench hearing her first case of the day. Instead, she was here, traumatized and humiliated, with marks on her wrists from handcuffs. Margaret followed her into the office and closed the door behind them. "Sarah, something terrible happened," she said. "Officer Matthews handcuffed Judge Morgan in the courthouse lobby." Sarah's eyes went wide. "What? Why would he do that?" "Because he didn't believe she was a judge," Margaret said quietly. Sarah looked at Rachel's wrists and saw the red marks. "Oh my God," she whispered. This is about race, isn't it?" Rachel finally spoke. "Yes," she said simply. "It's about race." She walked to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair. Her wrists still hurt and her whole body felt tired. She had been awake for less than 4 hours, and already she felt exhausted. Margaret set Rachel's briefcase on the desk. "Your Honor, I think you should document this," she said. "Take photos of your wrists. Write down everything that happened while it's still fresh in your mind. This is serious and there needs to be a complete record." Rachel nodded slowly. Margaret was right. As a judge, Rachel knew the importance of documentation and evidence. If she was going to file a complaint about this, she needed to have everything recorded properly. Sarah grabbed her phone. "I'll take the pictures," she offered. "Just hold your wrists out where we can see the marks clearly." Rachel extended her arms and Sarah took several photos from different angles. The marks showed up clearly in the pictures. They were dark red, almost purple in some spots where the handcuffs had been too tight. There was a knock on the door. Margaret opened it slightly and found Judge Bradley standing outside with 2 other judges. Judge Maria Rodriguez and Judge Kenneth Wilson had come with him. They all looked concerned and upset. "Can we come in?" Judge Bradley asked. "We heard what happened." Rachel nodded and they entered her chambers. Judge Rodriguez went straight to Rachel and put her hand on her shoulder. "Rachel, I am so sorry," she said. "This should never have happened." Judge Wilson was pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. "This is outrageous," he said. "Completely outrageous. That officer needs to be fired immediately." "He's been suspended already," Margaret told them. "Robert Torres relieved him of duty right away." "Suspended isn't enough," Judge Wilson said angrily. "He handcuffed a sitting judge in her own courthouse. Do you know what that means? Do you understand what message that sends?" Rachel looked up at him. "I understand perfectly, Ken," she said. "It means that no matter how hard I work, no matter what position I achieve, there will always be people who see me as less than, who see my skin color before they see anything else." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was right. They had all worked with Rachel for years. They had seen her intelligence, her fairness, her dedication to justice. But Officer Matthews hadn't seen any of that. He had only seen a black woman, and in his mind, that meant she didn't belong in the restricted areas of the courthouse. Judge Rodriguez sat down next to Rachel. "What do you need from us?" she asked. How can we help? Rachel thought about the question. What did she need? She needed this day to be over. She needed to go home and hug her son. She needed to talk to her husband and cry in his arms. But she couldn't do any of those things yet. She still had a job to do. I need to cancel my morning docket, Rachel said. I can't hear cases right now. I'm not in the right state of mind. Of course, Judge Bradley said. I'll reassign your cases to other judges. Don't worry about that. And I need to file a formal complaint, Rachel continued. This can't be swept under the rug. What Matthews did was wrong and he needs to be held accountable. Absolutely, Judge Wilson agreed. We'll support you completely. Whatever you need to do, we're behind you. Margaret had been standing quietly by the door, but now she spoke up. Your Honor, the courthouse administrator is on his way here. He wants to speak with you about what happened. Rachel sighed. She knew this would happen. The courthouse administrator, David Palmer, would want to handle this situation carefully. He would be worried about lawsuits, about bad publicity, about the courthouse's reputation. But Rachel wasn't thinking about any of those things. She was thinking about justice. Another knock came at the door. This time it was David Palmer himself. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and a serious expression. He looked at everyone gathered in Rachel's office, and then his eyes fell on Rachel. Judge Morgan, he said formally, I have been informed of the incident that occurred this morning. I want you to know that we are taking this extremely seriously. Are you? Rachel asked. Her voice was sharp. She was tired of people telling her they were taking things seriously. She wanted to see action, not just words. David nodded. Officer Matthews has been placed on immediate suspension pending a full investigation. We are reviewing the security footage from the lobby. We will interview all witnesses. And we will make sure that appropriate disciplinary action is taken. He handcuffed me, Rachel said, holding up her wrists to show him the marks. In front of dozens of people. He refused to believe that I was a judge. He treated me like a criminal in my own workplace. I know, David said quietly, and I cannot express how sorry I am that this happened. It should never have occurred. Rachel sat in her chambers, surrounded by her colleagues, and listened to David Palmer apologize. But his words felt empty. She had heard apologies like this before. People were always sorry after the damage was done. They were sorry after black people were hurt, humiliated, or worse. But their sorrow never seemed to prevent the next incident from happening. I want to see the security footage, Rachel said firmly. All of it. From the moment I entered the building until Matthews took the handcuffs off. David nodded. Of course, I'll have it sent to you immediately. We're preserving it as evidence for the investigation. Good, Rachel said, because I want a complete record of everything that happened. I want it documented that I was calm and respectful the entire time. I want it clear that I showed Matthews my identification. I want everyone to see that I did nothing wrong. Judge Wilson spoke up. Rachel's right. This needs to be documented thoroughly, because you know what's going to happen. Matthews and his lawyers are going to try to make it seem like Rachel was at fault somehow. They'll say she was aggressive or uncooperative. That's how these things always go. Sarah, Rachel's law clerk, had been typing on her computer while they talked. Now she looked up with a worried expression. Your Honor, it's already on social media, she said. Someone posted a video from the lobby. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment. She had known this would happen. In today's world, everyone had a camera in their pocket. Of course, someone had recorded the whole thing. What are people saying? She asked. Sarah hesitated. Most people are outraged on your behalf. They're calling for Matthews to be fired, but there are some comments that are not good. Some people are defending him. Let me guess, Judge Rodriguez said bitterly. They're saying he was just doing his job. They're saying Rachel should have been more cooperative. Sarah nodded sadly. Yes, that's exactly what some of them are saying. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at her wrists again. The marks were still there, dark and visible. They would probably bruise by tomorrow. She thought about taking something for the pain, but she wanted to feel it. She wanted to remember this feeling so she would never forget what had happened. I need some time alone. Rachel said quietly, Thank you all for your support, but I need to think. Everyone understood. Judge Bradley, Judge Rodriguez, and Judge Wilson each said goodbye and promised to help in any way they could. Margaret Chen squeezed Rachel's shoulder gently before leaving. David Palmer said he would be in his office if Rachel needed anything, and then he left too. Only Sarah remained. Do you want me to leave too? She asked. Rachel shook her head. No, stay. I might need you. Sarah sat down at her desk and went back to her computer. She was reading the social media posts, monitoring the situation. Rachel could see the concern on her young clerk's face. Sarah was only 2 years out of law school. She had so much hope and optimism about the legal system. Today was probably teaching her a harsh lesson. Rachel pulled out her phone and called her husband, Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, honey," he said cheerfully. "How's your day going?" Rachel felt her throat tighten. She hadn't cried yet, but hearing her husband's voice made it harder to hold back the tears. "Marcus," she said, and her voice broke. Something happened. Immediately his tone changed. "What, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said quickly. "But I need to tell you something." She took a deep breath and told him everything. About Officer Matthews, about being handcuffed, about the humiliation in front of everyone. Marcus was silent for a long moment after she finished. Then she heard him take a shaky breath. "I'm coming to the courthouse right now," he said. "No, you don't have to do that," Rachel said. "I'm fine, really." "Rachel, a police officer handcuffed you at your job," Marcus said, and she could hear the anger and pain in his voice. "My wife, a judge, was treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin. I'm coming. I need to see you." Rachel knew there was no point in arguing. Marcus was protective of her, always had been. They had been married for 18 years, and he had supported her through every challenge in her career. This would hit him hard, maybe even harder than it hit her. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll be here." After they hung up, Rachel sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She needed to write down everything that had happened while it was still fresh in her memory. Every detail mattered. What time she arrived, where she parked, what Matthew said, how he said it, the way he looked at her. She typed for almost an hour, recording every moment. When she finished, she had 3 pages of detailed notes. She saved the document and backed it up in multiple places. This was evidence, and she would not lose it. Sarah had been quiet all this time, but now she spoke. "Your Honor, the court administrator's office just sent over the security footage. Do you want to watch it?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, play it on the big screen." Sarah connected her computer to the television on the wall, and the video started playing. Rachel watched herself enter the courthouse lobby. She saw herself go through the metal detector. She saw Matthews watching her with suspicious eyes. And then she watched the whole confrontation unfold. It was worse than she remembered. On the video, she could see how calm and respectful she had been. She had smiled when she first spoke to Matthews. She had been polite and patient, and he had been aggressive and dismissive from the very beginning. When it got to the part where Matthews handcuffed her, Rachel felt sick. She watched herself turn around and put her hands behind her back. She saw the resignation in her own posture, the knowledge that fighting would only make things worse, and she saw Matthews roughly grab her wrists and lock the cuffs on too tight. "He never even really looked at my ID," Rachel said, pointing at the screen. "See?" He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. He had already decided I was lying. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "This is so wrong," she said. "I can't believe this happened to you." The video continued, showing Margaret Chen running over and explaining who Rachel was. It showed Matthew's face as he realized his mistake. It showed him fumbling with the handcuff keys with shaking hands. And it showed Rachel standing there, silent and dignified, while everyone watched. When the video ended, Rachel sat back in her chair. "Save that video," she said. "Make multiple copies. I want to make sure it doesn't disappear." "Already done," Sarah said. I saved it to 3 different locations. There was a knock at the door. Sarah opened it and Marcus came in. He was still wearing his work clothes, a suit and tie. He must have left his office the moment they hung up the phone. He crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped his arms around Rachel. That's when Rachel finally cried. She had been holding it in all morning, staying strong in front of her colleagues and the courthouse staff. But now, in her husband's arms, she let the tears fall. She cried for the humiliation she had suffered. She cried for the injustice of it all. And she cried because she knew this was just one more example of the racism that Black people faced every single day. Marcus held her tight and let her cry. He didn't say anything, just rubbed her back and kissed the top of her head. After a few minutes, Rachel pulled away and wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "Don't apologize," Marcus said firmly. "You have every right to cry. What happened to you was horrible." He looked at her wrists and saw the marks. His jaw clenched and Rachel could see the anger in his eyes.
"He did this to you?"
Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. The handcuffs were too tight, Rachel said. I told him he was hurting me, but he didn't care. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Rachel knew he was trying to control his anger. Her husband was usually a calm, gentle man, but when it came to protecting his family, he could be fierce. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. Are you filing a complaint? Yes, Rachel said. A formal complaint. And I'm thinking about going public with this. Marcus looked surprised. Public, like talking to the media? Rachel nodded. If this could happen to me, a judge in my own courthouse, what does that say about how regular people are treated? I have a platform. I have a voice. Maybe I should use it. Sarah spoke up from her desk. Your Honor, if you do go public, you should know that the video is already spreading online. It has thousands of views already. People are talking about this. Rachel walked over to Sarah's computer and looked at the screen. The video was everywhere, on Twitter, on Facebook, on news websites. And people were angry. They were demanding justice. They were calling for Officer Matthews to be fired and charged with a crime. But there were other comments too. Racist comments. Comments saying that Rachel must have done something wrong. Comments saying that Matthews was just following procedure. Comments filled with hatred and ugliness. Don't read those, Marcus said, seeing the pain on Rachel's face. Those people don't matter. But they do matter, Rachel said. Because those people are the reason this happened in the first place. That hatred, that racism, it's everywhere. It's in our police departments, our courts, our schools. And if we don't confront it, nothing will ever change. Marcus took her hand. Then confront it, he said. If you want to speak out, I'll support you. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. Rachel spent 3 days thinking about what to do. She talked to Marcus every night after their son went to bed. She spoke with her close friends, other judges, and even her former law school professor. Everyone had an opinion. Some people told her to stay quiet and let the courthouse handle it internally. Others encouraged her to speak out and demand change. On Wednesday evening, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her son, Trevor, was upstairs doing homework. Marcus sat across from her, waiting patiently while she made her decision. The marks on her wrist had turned into bruises, dark purple against her brown skin. She had worn long sleeves to cover them when she went back to court on Tuesday. I've made up my mind, Rachel finally said. I'm going to hold a press conference. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. It will be everywhere. People will have opinions about you, about us, about our family. I know, Rachel said, but I keep thinking about that young man I saw in the hallway when Matthews was dragging me away. He looked so scared. And I thought, if this can happen to me, what chance does he have? What chance do any of us have? She took a sip of her tea and continued. I have spent my entire career fighting for justice. I've sent people to prison when they broke the law. I've protected victims. I've upheld the Constitution. But what good is all of that if I stay silent when injustice happens to me? Marcus nodded slowly. Then let's do it. What do you need from me? I need you to be there with me, Rachel said, standing next to me when I speak. I need Trevor to know that his mother didn't back down when she was treated unfairly. That night, Rachel called David Palmer, the courthouse administrator. She told him about her decision to go public. He was quiet for a long moment. Judge Morgan, I understand your feelings, David said carefully, but I hope you'll consider how this might affect the courthouse. We're conducting a full investigation. Matthews will face consequences, but a press conference could turn this into a media circus. It's already a media circus, David, Rachel replied. The video has been viewed millions of times. News reporters have been calling my office nonstop. I can either control the narrative by speaking directly, or I can let everyone else tell my story for me. David sighed. You're right. When do you want to do this? Friday morning, Rachel said. I'll hold the press conference at the courthouse. I want people to see the building where this happened. The next day, Rachel worked with Sarah to write her statement. She wanted to be clear and direct. She wanted to explain what happened without being emotional. Most importantly, she wanted to make it about more than just herself. This isn't just about me being handcuffed, Rachel said as she and Sarah worked on the statement. It's about the systemic racism that allows things like this to happen. It's about the fact that Officer Matthews looked at me and immediately assumed I didn't belong, simply because I'm black, Sarah typed while Rachel talked. They went through multiple drafts, changing words, adding details, making sure the message was exactly right. By Thursday evening, they had a statement that Rachel felt good about. On Friday morning, Rachel woke up early. She dressed carefully in a black suit and white blouse. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. This was going to be hard, but it was necessary. Marcus drove her to the courthouse. Reporters were already gathered outside. There were television cameras, photographers, and journalists with notebooks. Someone had set up a podium with microphones at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Rachel's hands were shaking as she got out of the car. Marcus took her hand and squeezed it. "You can do this," he said. "You're the strongest person I know." They walked toward the podium together. Other judges were there too, standing in a group to show their support. Judge Bradley, Judge Rodriguez, and Judge Wilson had all come, along with several others. Margaret Chen was there, and so were many courthouse staff members. Rachel stepped up to the podium. The crowd of reporters pressed closer, cameras flashing. She pulled out her statement and laid it on the podium in front of her. Then she looked up at all the faces watching her. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Rachel Morgan, and I am a judge at this courthouse. I have served on the bench for 5 years. On Monday morning, I was handcuffed by a security officer in this building. I want to tell you what happened and why I believe we need to have a serious conversation about racial profiling and bias in our justice system." She told the whole story, just as it had happened. She described arriving at the courthouse, entering through the public entrance and being stopped by Officer Matthews. She explained how she had shown her identification, how she had remained calm and respectful, and how Matthews had refused to believe she was a judge. "I need you to understand something," Rachel said, looking directly into the cameras. "I did everything right. I was polite. I cooperated. I showed my identification. And still I was handcuffed and humiliated in front of my colleagues and the people who come to this courthouse seeking justice." She held up her wrists so everyone could see the bruises. "These marks are fading, but the damage to my dignity, to my sense of safety in my own workplace, that will take much longer to heal." Rachel paused and looked at the reporters. Now, some of you might be thinking this was just one bad officer. This was an isolated incident. But it wasn't. This kind of thing happens every single day to Black people across this country. We are stopped, questioned, detained, and arrested at higher rates than white people. We are viewed with suspicion in our own communities, in our workplaces, even in our homes. The difference is, I have a platform. I have a position of authority. I have the ability to speak out without fear of losing my job or facing retaliation. Most people don't have that. So I'm not just speaking for myself today. I'm speaking for everyone who has been profiled, everyone who has been treated as less than, everyone who has been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Rachel took a breath and continued. Officer Matthews made a choice that day. He looked at me and decided I didn't belong in the restricted areas of this courthouse. Not because I was doing anything wrong, not because I was breaking any rules, but because in his mind a Black woman couldn't possibly be a judge. This is the reality of being Black in America. It doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter what position you hold or what you've achieved. There will always be people who see your skin color first and everything else second. She looked down at her statement, then back up at the cameras. I want to be clear about something. I am not anti-police. I work with law enforcement every day in my courtroom. I have tremendous respect for officers who do their jobs with integrity and fairness. But we cannot ignore the fact that there are officers like Matthews who bring their biases and prejudices to work with them. And when those officers have power over other people's lives, the consequences can be devastating. If this could happen to me, a judge in the courthouse where I work, imagine what happens to people who don't have my advantages. Imagine the young Black man who gets stopped on the street for no reason. Imagine the Black woman who gets followed around a store. Imagine the Black teenager who gets pulled over for driving while Black. These things happen constantly, and most of the time nobody pays attention. Rachel's voice grew stronger. Well, I'm asking you to pay attention now. I'm asking you to think about the systems we have in place that allow this kind of discrimination to continue. I'm asking you to demand better from the people we trust to protect and serve our communities. She talked about the investigation that was ongoing. She explained that the courthouse was reviewing Matthew's employment record and that disciplinary action would be taken. But she also made it clear that one officer being punished wasn't enough. We need comprehensive bias training for all law enforcement officers. We need better hiring practices that screen out people with prejudices. We need accountability systems that actually work, so that officers like Matthews face real consequences for their actions before they can hurt multiple people. We need to examine our own biases too. Every single one of us has unconscious biases based on our experiences and what society has taught us. The question is, what do we do about them? Do we acknowledge them and work to change? Or do we deny they exist and keep perpetuating the same injustices? Rachel looked at Marcus, who was standing off to the side. He smiled at her and she felt her strength renewed. I am speaking out today because I refuse to be silent. I refuse to accept that this is just how things are. I refuse to tell my son that he needs to accept being treated as less than because of the color of his skin. Change is possible, but only if we demand it. Only if we refuse to look away when we see injustice. Only if we hold people accountable for their actions and their biases. She picked up her statement from the podium. Officer Matthews owes me an apology, but more than that, he owes one to every person he has profiled or discriminated against during his career. The courthouse administration owes me better security protocols that prevent this from happening again. And our society owes it to every black person, every person of color, to do better. Rachel looked directly into the cameras one last time. I am Judge Rachel Morgan. I am a black woman. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a public servant, and I deserve to be treated with dignity and respect just like everyone else. Thank you. The reporters immediately started shouting questions. Rachel answered a few of them, explaining more details about what had happened and what she hoped would change. But after about 10 minutes, she stepped away from the podium. She had said what she needed to say. The press conference was replayed on every news channel that evening. Rachel's words spread across social media, shared millions of times. People from all over the country, from all walks of life, reached out to express their support. Many shared their own stories of being profiled and discriminated against. Rachel read as many of these stories as she could, and each one broke her heart a little more. But not everyone supported her. There were people who criticized her for speaking out. Some said she was playing the race card. Others accused her of trying to ruin Officer Matthews' life over a simple mistake. The hate mail started arriving at the courthouse by the end of the week. Rachel's personal email and social media accounts were flooded with racist messages. Don't read them, Marcus told her one evening as they sat together in their living room. Those people aren't worth your time or energy. But Rachel couldn't completely ignore them. These messages showed her exactly what she was fighting against. The hatred, the ignorance, the refusal to acknowledge that racism still existed. It was all there in black and white, in the angry words of people who felt threatened by her speaking out. The investigation into Officer Matthews moved quickly. The courthouse administrator's office reviewed all the security footage, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and examined Matthews's personnel file. What they found was disturbing. Over his 15 years as a police officer and courthouse security guard, Matthews had received 23 complaints. Most of them came from black people who said he had treated them unfairly or with excessive aggression. Each time the complaints had been investigated, but nothing serious had been done. Matthews had received verbal warnings and had been sent to a few training sessions, but he had never been suspended or seriously disciplined. The system had failed to hold him accountable, and as a result he had continued his pattern of behavior for years. 3 weeks after the incident, the courthouse held a disciplinary hearing. Rachel attended, sitting in the back of the room with Marcus by her side. Matthews sat at a table with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who tried to argue that his client had simply made an honest mistake. Officer Matthews did not know Judge Morgan, the lawyer said. He had never seen her before. He was simply following security protocols when he encountered someone trying to access a restricted area without proper authorization. But the evidence told a different story. The security footage showed clearly that Rachel had tried to show Matthews her identification. It showed that she had been calm and respectful. And most damaging of all, it showed that Matthews had barely looked at her ID before deciding it was fake. The hearing lasted for 3 hours. Witnesses testified about what they had seen. Margaret Chen described how she had run over and explained who Rachel was. James, the older black security officer, testified about Matthews's history of treating black people differently than white people. When it was Rachel's turn to speak, she stood up and walked to the front of the room. She didn't bring notes. She spoke from her heart. "This isn't about one bad day," Rachel said. "This is about a pattern of behavior that was allowed to continue for 15 years. Officer Matthews didn't suddenly become racist the day he handcuffed me. He had been treating black people with suspicion and aggression for his entire career, and nobody stopped him." She looked at the panel of administrators who would decide Matthews' fate. "If you let him keep his job, you're sending a message. You're saying that it's okay to profile people based on their race. You're saying that complaints from black people don't matter. You're saying that even when a black woman achieves the position of judge, she can still be treated like a criminal in her own workplace. Officer Matthews needs to face real consequences for his actions. Not a slap on the wrist, not more training that he'll ignore. Real accountability." The panel deliberated for 2 days. On Friday afternoon, they announced their decision. Officer Derek Matthews was terminated from his position, effective immediately. He would not be eligible for rehire at any courthouse or government facility. Additionally, the panel recommended that the local police department review his conduct during his time as an officer to see if any of his arrests or interactions should be re-examined. Rachel felt a sense of relief when she heard the news. It wasn't complete justice, but it was something. Matthews had finally been held accountable for his actions, but Rachel knew that firing one officer wasn't enough to fix the bigger problem. So she got to work. She met with the courthouse administration and proposed a series of reforms. She wanted mandatory bias training for all security officers, not just a one-time session but ongoing education. She wanted better hiring practices that would screen out people with histories of discrimination. She wanted a new complaint system that would actually take allegations seriously and result in real consequences. At first, some administrators resisted. They said the changes would be too expensive or too difficult to implement. But Rachel was persistent. She used her position and her platform to push for reform. She wrote articles for legal journals. She gave speeches at conferences. She appeared on news programs to talk about the need for change in the justice system. Other judges joined her cause. Judge Bradley, Judge Rodriguez, and Judge Wilson all supported her proposals. Together, they formed a coalition that pushed the courthouse administration to take action. 6 months after the incident, the courthouse announced a comprehensive reform package. All security officers would undergo quarterly bias training. New hiring procedures would include psychological evaluations and reviews of any past complaints or disciplinary actions. A new oversight committee, which included judges, lawyers, and community members, would review all complaints against security officers. The courthouse also created a victims' compensation fund for people who had been wrongly detained or mistreated by security staff. Several people came forward with their own stories about Officer Matthews, and they received apologies and compensation for what they had experienced. Rachel continued to serve on the bench, hearing cases and making rulings just as she had before, but she was different now. The incident had changed her. She was more aware of the power dynamics in her courtroom. She paid closer attention to how defendants were treated, especially defendants of color. She spoke up more often when she saw injustice. Her son, Trevor, was proud of his mother. He was 17 now, getting ready to apply to colleges. He had watched the press conference and seen his mother stand up for what was right. "You're brave, Mom," he told her one night. "A lot of people would have stayed quiet." "I couldn't stay quiet," Rachel replied. "Not when I have a voice and a platform. Too many people don't have that. I had to speak up for them." The case became a turning point in conversations about racial profiling and bias in the justice system. Law schools used it as a teaching example. Police departments across the country reviewed their own procedures and training programs. Some places made real changes. Others paid lip service to reform but didn't follow through. The fight was far from over. Rachel received awards and recognition for her courage in speaking out. She was invited to speak at universities and conferences. Magazine articles were written about her, but she never forgot why she had done it. It wasn't about getting awards or recognition. It was about justice. A year after the incident, Rachel was walking through the courthouse lobby when she saw a young black woman going through security. The woman was dressed professionally, carrying a briefcase. The security officer, a new hire named Williams, smiled and greeted her politely. "Good morning, counselor," Officer Williams said respectfully. "Have a good day in court." The young woman smiled back and continued on her way. Rachel watched the interaction and felt a small measure of satisfaction. This was what change looked like. This was what happened when people were trained properly and held accountable for their actions. Rachel continued to her courtroom. She had a full docket today, starting with a case about housing discrimination. As she put on her black robe and prepared to take the bench, she thought about how far things had come and how far they still had to go. The mark on her wrists had faded long ago. But the memory of that day would stay with her forever, and she would use that memory to fuel her work, to push for justice, to fight against discrimination wherever she saw it. Because that's what judges were supposed to do, not just interpret the law but also stand up for what was right. Not just sit on the bench but also work to make the system more fair and more just for everyone. Rachel walked into her courtroom and the bailiff called out, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Rachel Morgan presiding. She took her seat and looked out at the people gathered in her courtroom. People of all races, all backgrounds, all walks of life. They had come seeking justice and she would do her best to provide it. "Please be seated," Rachel said. "Let's begin." The incident with Officer Matthews had taught her many things. It had shown her the ugly reality of racism that still existed in America. It had revealed the failures in systems that were supposed to protect people. It had demonstrated how power and prejudice could combine to create injustice. But it had also shown her the power of speaking out. It had revealed that change was possible when people demanded it. It had demonstrated that one voice, raised in the right way at the right time, could make a difference. Rachel Morgan had been handcuffed by a racist officer in her own courthouse. She had been humiliated and hurt, but she had not let that moment define her. Instead, she had used it as a catalyst for change. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her anger into action. And in doing so, she had made the justice system just a little bit more just. Not perfect, not by a long shot, but better. And that was worth fighting for. As she began hearing her first case of the day, Rachel felt a sense of peace. The journey had been difficult, but it had been necessary. And she would continue on that journey for as long as she served on the bench. Because justice wasn't just something you handed down from a courtroom. It was something you fought for every single day. It was something you demanded when it was denied. It was something you never stopped pursuing, no matter how hard the fight became. Judge Rachel Morgan had learned that lesson the hard way. But it was a lesson she would never forget. And it was a lesson she hoped would inspire others to stand up, speak out, and demand the justice that everyone deserved. The story of what happened to her that Monday morning would be told for years to come. It would be taught in law schools and police academies. It would be discussed in courtrooms and community centers, and hopefully it would help prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. Because that's what true justice looked like, not just punishing the guilty, but changing the systems that allowed injustice to happen in the first place. Not just winning one case, but creating lasting reform that would protect generations to come. Rachel looked down at the case file in front of her and began to read. There was work to be done, and she was ready to do it. The fight for justice never ended, but she had proven that it was a fight worth having, and she would continue fighting. One case at a time, one reform at a time, one voice at a time, until the world was a little bit more fair for everyone.